Welcome to 42 Live and Extreme Macro Photography with Andrei Duman and SanDisk Professional. My name is Pete Isgreg. I'm with SanDisk Professional, and as you can, hopefully you can see both of us on the screen at the same time.
Yes.
That's Andrei over there. We want to thank you guys for coming to our event, and I got a few housekeeping tips before we pass it off to Andrei to show you guys the main event. But first, if you haven't already joined the chat, it's on the 42 Live event registration page. So please go in there and join the chat. We're going to be using that. If you have any questions to ask Andrei during this event, please put them in the chat there. And as I can see, a whole lot of you are already doing, please let us know where you're calling in from, because these virtual events, we're not just somewhere in the United States, we're globally, and there's a lot of people from around the world. So I love seeing where we get people to come in from for all of these. So yeah, again, put your name in the chat, put your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring it. I'll be answering some. I'll be talking to Andrei about them as well. Also on the event page, you will notice there is a raffle entry for one of our SanDisk Professional G Drive SSDs. Andrei's going to talk a little bit more about this during his presentation, but we're going to be raffling this off. So fill out that form, put your name and your email in that form. And for those of you who are watching the recording of this, we're going to leave it open for a couple days after this event, so you can still register for the raffle if you're watching this within a couple days after today's actual live event. But just a little, this SSD goes up to 4 terabytes, although we're giving away a 2 terabyte version of it, but it's 2,000 pounds crush proof, and it's IP67 rated for water and dust resistance, so it's super durable. But that aside, this little grill on it, this is a heat sink on the SSD. This keeps the drive running cool enough that no matter how long you use it, it maintains the full speed. It doesn't data throttle. It doesn't start to slow down. For those of you who don't know, SSD, this flash-based memory that's inside, when you use it, it heats up. And in order to prevent itself from melting, it turns itself on and off in nanosecond intervals, which the end result is you see read-write system slowdowns on it. But with ours, we keep the heat dissipated enough that you get the full speed of it. So if you're doing any kind of editing or scratch disk or using this for your library, this is going to do it better than any other SSD on the market. You're going to get the full performance of the drive, and Andrei will attest to that later. So fill out the raffle form.
I'll attest to it now. It's amazing.
So fill out the raffle form, enter for that, and we will reach out to you via email if you are the winner. So with that said, Andrei, please take it away and let us see what you've done with exoskeleton and macro photography.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, SanDisk Professional, and thank you so much, Adorama, for allowing myself to present my work and to talk to you guys about macro photography and getting a sense of how I did this particular project that I've spent a year and 10 months doing. It's definitely, without question, being the most complex, most difficult, most time-consuming, most frustrating, yet at the same time also just the most rewarding project that I've ever done. And I'll go into a lot of detail with how I did it and why it became so complicated to do. But to begin with, I guess we need to talk about what macro photography really is about. So if you just ask the regular person down the street, what is their definition of macro photography, they'll probably just say, well, it's just a close-up image of something, whatever the subject is. To get into a little bit more specifics, and I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on this because the rest of the presentation will sort of keep coming back to these concepts. Macro photography, it's all about your magnification of ratio. And what exactly is that? Magnification is the relationship between the size of the in-focus subject projected onto your sensor, your image sensor, and the subject size in real life. So what exactly does that mean? So let's just say you have a child that is 1 meter tall, and the projection is coming onto a sensor that is 1 centimeter. That's 1 divided by 100. So that is 1/100th magnification factor, which means that the child is 100 times larger than what the sensor is on the back of the screen. When you're talking about a subject that's the same size, so let's say there is an insect, a fly, that is 1 centimeter in size, and your sensor is 1 centimeter, well, then that's a 1-to-1 magnification. And when you talk about true macro photography, that's what you're really talking about. Anything that is a minimum of 1-to-1 magnification. You can get higher. You can get 2 to 1, you can get 3 to 1, 4 to 1, you can get 10 to 1. And then you're getting into sort of like your microscopes and all those insane optics that get 20 to 1 magnifications. One of the challenges with macro photography is how to handle your depth of field. So before we talk about shallow and deep depth of field, what exactly is depth of field? And I do have notes for this because I actually don't know the full definition of this myself. I apologize, but it's the area in front of and beyond the point of which focus is set that can be rendered in sharp focus. What does that mean? Let's say, for example, you've got a lens and you're doing landscape photography and you've got trees in the front line, but then you've got these beautiful mountains in the back and you want to get both focus of the trees and the mountains. What aperture do you need to set for that? You need to set a very low aperture, a small aperture, which means your f-stop number needs to be f22, f32. What that does is it will make sure that those setting, the sharpness is all the way from the front all the way through to the back. When you've got depth of field that's and that's called very deep depth of field. When you've got shallow depth of field, and we're going to be talking about this a lot when it comes to macro, because this is one of the issues that you really have to overcome, is dealing with this incredible shallow depth of field. What that basically means is your depth of field basically is dependent on 3 factors: your aperture, your focal length, and your subject distance. So when you're talking about macro photography, your distance to your subject is very, very close. It's very small distances. And regardless of whatever your aperture setting is, so if you're at an f2 or a 1.8 or 1.4, the higher the magnification, the smaller your depth of field is. So what that means is, as I'm going from a 1-to-1 magnification to a 2-to-1 to a 4-to-1, my depth of field is constantly getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which means that there are just only slices of focus that are very short, very small between each other, that I need to make sure that I have to render in focus. And we'll discuss that, because the only way to do that is to really do focus stacking. Depending on what you're shooting, some people may say, well, maybe I want to shoot at an f22 or an f26 or a 32. The problem with that is you're going to start getting into this photography issue called diffraction, and that brings a lot of issues with your image, which we're not going to cover in this particular topic. But those were sort of just the basics in terms of what exactly is macro photography. For me, for this particular project, and I'll start talking about this basically starting now, is I was at a 4-to-1 magnification. So the image size was 4 times larger on the sensor when it came to these particular insects. So how did I come about to do this particular project? Where did I get this idea? And, you know, if I really think about it, it really started when I was growing up. I was fortunate, you can call it that. I grew up in a communist country in the early 80s. I was born in 82. I grew up in Romania. And it's appropriate given what's going on in the world right now, but things were, you know, during communist times are very restrictive. There's not a lot of information. I didn't know a great deal about what the world was out there in terms of plants and insects and animals and whatever else. It wasn't a great deal of education coming through. So when the collapse happened and I moved to the United Kingdom, I just became flooded with all this information. I mean, the internet was kind of kicking off at the time, and there were books, and there were, you know, these children magazines on insects, and I just became fascinated, particularly with insects. I was so drawn to their variety of colors and textures and just unique features that at some point I knew that I really wanted to capture them in a way that could really show off that beauty, because everything that I've seen was fantastic. It was great, but I really wanted to dig in a lot deeper when it came to seeing intricate details in a way that maybe has never been captured before. So that's really my initial fascination with it. How did I come about all these years afterwards? Because at the time, obviously, I was still learning photography. I was still learning the technique for it. And also the technology wasn't quite there yet. To tell you what I'm shooting on right now, I'm a phase 1 ambassador. So I shoot on a medium format camera system. It's 151 megapixels, which is wonderful when you're doing product and automotive and landscape. It's fantastic because you're usually taking very few images. You're taking 20, 30, 40 images, let's say, if you're focus stacking a watch or a car, depending on the depth of it. What I learned with this project and why it became so difficult is just how complicated it is to try and shoot such intricate species with a medium format camera system. My depth of field is so incredibly shallow given the technology that I was using that I had to basically relearn photography from scratch. So let me go back a little bit how I ended up getting the specimens. Knowing that I wanted to do this project, I needed to find some really cool specimens, right? I really wanted to find somewhere where I can have a plethora of examples that I can choose from to say, okay, I want that one because that's got this beautiful green emerald feature and on its back, and this one's got amazing wings, and it's just I wanted variety from these specimens. So I partnered up with University of California in Riverside, as well as the Natural History Museum of San Diego, that allowed me to come into there. I explained to them my project, what I wanted to do, that I wanted to capture this in a way that maybe hasn't been done before, and they were really excited about it. And they basically gave me access to their entire collection. The Riverside office has over, I think, 5 million specimens. And it was just an incredible experience to just be able to go in there and walk this gigantic floor that is just rows and rows and rows of different species from, this one's from Africa, this is from Asia. They're all separated from species to size to where they were coming from. It was just laboriously, fantastically organized. So, and I went there 5 or 6 times. And I just basically would pull out these drawers, and I spent hours there, hours and hours and hours. And I pulled out these drawers, and I walked over to the gentleman that was taking care of the collection. I said, "Can I have that one? can I take this one as well?" And they did, and it was amazing. They gave me these boxes that I just, with very strict instructions on how to take care of them and how to clean them, and I had to store them in my fridge so other bugs don't eat them, or they can not decompress or decompose, not decompress, or my cats don't really stumble on them and munch on them, I guess. But so I ended up with all these boxes and boxes and boxes just sitting in my fridge that I would then use for experimentation. Finding the gear was also very tricky because these insects are so tiny. Whatever lens that phase 1 has, which the only macro lens that they have is a 120 macro, I simply cannot find focus on a subject that is quite so small. I can't get that close to it because everything would just be completely out of focus. And if I step all the way back to try and find focus, the image would be so tiny. It would be almost pointless to be able to shoot it, even with 150 megapixels, because I'll have to zoom all the way in to be able to get some sort of render. So I needed something that was quite unique. And Alpa, after I explained the project to them, they just so happened to be working on a project. They have, at the time, it was a prototype equipment that they had. And it was a 1 of 3 in existence when I first started the project. And they said, we love this concept. Here's the equipment, go out and shoot it. And it was quite a steep learning curve, because what this device really is, and you attach your phase 1 back. So I still had the full 151 megapixels back, but it's a technical camera, it's a 12 FPS that is attached to a rail that is controlled electronically. And what's amazing about this is that it has the ability to focus and incrementally move in 1 micron increments. For reference, if you take a human strand, a human hair, a single human hair strand, that is 75 microns. So if you think in a thickness of a human hair, I can take 75 images, which is kind of insane. And then when it's coupled with probably the greatest macro lens that's ever been made, which is the Rodenstock 105 mil, you really have a powerful combination. But again, there was quite a lot of learning curve that I had to teach myself how to do, because this is focus stacking, but on a complete different level. It basically comes, and I can share the screen with you very briefly to show you what it looks like. So this is the setup that I have. Oops. So this is the back of it with the phase 1 digital camera attached on the back. And this is sort of the side view. So all these cables are obviously serve a function to be able to basically keep this thing alive. And it really does feel like it's kind of like Terminator. If you take one of these cables out, everything will just sort of collapse. But as you can see on the lower side, the rail moves forward, and it's controlled by this console on the lower left over here that I can then say, I want to move in 1 micron or 10 microns or 50 microns, depending on how far I want to choose in between my individual images. And the Rodenstock 105 is all the way at the far end over there. So this also took quite a lot of time to try and experiment with and constantly sort of play with. Let's assume I got that done and I figured out the camera, how to use it. The next step was, okay, I have these specimens. How do I get them ready? How do I shoot them? What position do I shoot them in? What background do I use? What kind of light settings am I doing?
Andre, let me interrupt real quick because
Yeah.
I had a question
Yes,
about
please.
the camera that you use that you just showed us. How would somebody get one of those, or what would they need to do? Is this something that they could rent somewhere or they could find? And how did you get this set up?
This was directly from Alpa. So this was something that they were working on at the time. Like I said, it was a prototype. There are not many of these in the world right now. It's not cheap
I
in the
wouldn't assume,
slightest.
yeah.
I don't want to don't quote me on this exactly, but it's over $50,000 without the lens and without obviously the digital back. The digital back is around 50,000 as well. So when you combine everything together, you're definitely close to over $100,000 in gear. And there's other ways to do photography, macro photography. The way that I wanted to shoot my project, this was the best setup that I could get my hands on.
Okay.
If that answered the question. I hope that didn't scare too many people out of it. Maybe. Oh, and by the way, if anyone has questions as I'm talking, please just shout them out or put them in the chat, and Pete's going to jump in, because don't wait until the very end. It's always nice to get questions as I'm sort of talking. It just makes a lot more sense and more relevant, because I might jump off the topic. So basically, where was I? So I have the specimens. How do I shoot them? What background do I choose? What position do I choose? What lighting setup do I have? And this is, again, another reason why it took so long for me to do this, because all of this took a tremendous amount of time. And I'll explain why it took so long very shortly, because it's the whole process that's incredibly time consuming to do. With the insects, let's say I start on one insect. I was using surgical loops and a very, very fine camel brush to try as best as I could to clean off any debris, any dust, any bit of fluff that was on it. Because again, these, even though they're from the private collections, they're not, they're not meant to be sort of shown in a museum. They're there for conservation purposes. So they're not in the most pristine condition. They have all their legs, they have all their antennae, all the colors are there, but again, they're still dirty. You still need to clean them. So that took quite a bit of time. It took close to, I would say, half an hour at least per insect to do that. And even then, I couldn't clean everything, because there's so many that are microscopic things that I just can't see with the human eye, even with the loops. But let's assume I clean the bug. It's as clean as I can possibly get it. Most of the time I found that it's best, because they're already come pinned. Obviously, these specimens are dead. They're not live. For me to be able to shoot this many images that I'm going to discuss in a second, this insect cannot be moving. And we'll discuss that in a second as to how to do one if it is moving as opposed to just dead. But this one's dead. So it's got a pin through it, and I just basically put it on against the styrofoam section in the back, and I just stuck it on, and I put some black doobie behind it. So that created my black background. You can choose whatever background you want. It's really what you do in post with it. But that gave me a good base platform for my background. Once I have that, next was lighting. And this took quite a lot of time. I spoke to so many people, like, how would you do this? How would you light this? People talked about putting in a styrofoam box, like a gigantic box, and just have only a one light setup that flashes every single time, and it just floods the box, so it becomes like this huge softbox. I didn't like the results of that, to be honest, too much. So after weeks and weeks of experimenting just on the lighting setup and what felt most natural to me, I ended up with a 3-light setup. So it was almost close to a 45-degree angle towards the insect. And then there was one that was coming up from the top to be able to get the edges as well. So that worked best for me. But again, it was dependent on every single insect, because I was trying to light a different section that I found to be most interesting. Not all were exactly the same light setup, but that was roughly the general thing that I felt worked best. Once that's done, you get to the really important part right here. So your lighting is good, your bug is in place. Hopefully it doesn't move, it doesn't fall off, which it did one time. It's clean as it can possibly be for the time being. Now you get to the camera setup. So because I'm so close to this insect, I am millimeters away. Maybe my camera is sort of here and the insect is here, really not too far away from it. It means that my depth of field, and again, I'm shooting at, I think it was a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 magnification on these. Remember, as my magnification ratio gets higher, my depth of field becomes smaller and smaller. So I'm already fighting that depth of field. And what that means is there is just no way that I can get one image where I keep this insect in complete sharpness all the way through. So how do you fix that? The only way to do that is with a photography technique called focus stacking. And what focus stacking basically means is that you are taking slices of focus throughout the entire length of your subject or my insect and individually shoot it. And then in post-production, you combine them all together where all those individual slices make the entire thing to be fully sharp all the way through. And that's a technique that's used for product photography. It's used for car photography. It's used for a lot of, even landscape if you want. If you really want to get extra depth of field and you don't want to do an f22 because potentially you're introducing diffraction, you can shoot at an f11 and then choose your near point and you choose your far point. So let's talk about what that means. I have this camera in live view. I can, with my control panel that I had over here, let me just bring up the screen again. So with the control panel that I have on the left-hand side, I am choosing to move the camera on the rail forward such that when I look at my live view, I can see what is the closest part of that insect that is closest to the lens. So that's my near point. So let's say, for example, one of the antennas is really sticking upwards towards the camera. That is going to be, I have to find where the closest point is and lock that in. And that's what the module does. It allows you to lock it in. And then you find where your far point is. So let's say, for example, one of its legs is going all the way away from the camera. You have to then move your rail and basically hunt what you think is the furthest point. And that can be a challenge in itself because, again, you're dealing with such minute depth of field. You can't always tell what is actually the furthest point because it might be one of these legs, but it could very well be one that's right behind it that you can't tell. You just simply, everything is so fuzzy. Everything is just completely out of focus. So you have to literally hunt all the way through until you find your near point and you find your far point. Lock those 2 points. And then from that, you then decide how many steps is this rail going to choose to take an image and then move forward. Do you want it to be 1 micron? Do you want it to be 5? Do you want it to be 10? Do you want it to be 50? That again took a tremendous amount of experimentation because if you choose the steps to be too far apart, let's say you do 100 microns because you don't want to shoot as many images, right? Because my steps are larger, so I'm taking less images. If you do 100, there's a very good chance that that step might be too big. So when you put all those images together, you're going to have gaps of focus throughout the entire bug. And it's completely useless. It defeats the entire purpose of what you're trying to do. If your step is really small, so let's say 1 micron, a 1 micron is tiny. Like I said, a human hair is 75 microns. So imagine an insect that's 10 millimeters and you do the math of how many images that will take. It's tens of thousands. So you need an amazing hard drive. We'll get to that in a second. So it really was coming down to experimentation as to where do I want this thing to sit? 10 microns, 20 microns? You have to do the entire process and then you go back to look at your final flat file to say, yeah, everything is in focus. And I haven't sacrificed any slices where it's out of focus. So that took a long time. Once you have that, I was using broncolor lights. I had my flash set ready to go. I set a delay, so I'm not doing any vibrations after every single image. So I set a 3 to 5 second delay. So every 3 to 5 seconds, it would take a shot and move forward, whatever increments that I decided to choose. And literally you just let it go. And it took sometimes 4 hours, sometimes 5 hours of just continuous shooting. Every 3 seconds, it would take a shot, move forward, move a shot, move forward. So you go away for 3-4 hours and you do nothing. And you hope that nothing has gone wrong in that 4 hour. What can go wrong? The light didn't flash. for a period of time for whatever reason, let's say one of the bulbs has gone out, or it just for 30, 40, 50, 100 images, it didn't go, you're not going to see it until the very end. The insect may move ever so slightly. Let's say, for example, you put the pin in, but it didn't quite go all the way through. And after 3-4 hours, because of gravity or whatever else, it ever so slightly moved down. I had one instance where I was shooting this bumblebee and it was perfectly fine when I put it there. By the time I got back, its entire head fell off. Like the head was on the floor. I'm like, half of the images were fine, and then half of it had no head. Completely, obviously, rendered useless that entire insect altogether. You can't have any vibration whatsoever. So one time there was an earthquake, and that I was in the middle of a 3,000 image stack. Had to delete the whole thing because I knew that the period of that earthquake is going to be crucial enough that I'll be able to see vibrations through. If I went away, let's say I wanted to get lunch and I knew I wasn't coming back for 4 hours, it was in the middle of summer, I was shooting in my home, the AC automatically turned on because it's California and it was very, very hot. That vibration of the house that's going through the floor, that's going through my tripod, is sending vibrations constantly through, and the whole thing is rendered useless. One of the issues that we had was with the Alpa rail that was moving. Because it was a prototype, it wasn't ready really for the market. In a sense, they were kind of using me as a guinea pig. So what I noticed is that I would have, without earthquake, without the AC turning on, without the insect moving, I would have sections where it was super sharp and then very not sharp, super sharp and then very soft, super sharp, soft, and it was consistent. So what we ended up doing and figuring out, working with the Alpa team, the rail itself had an issue electronically that it was skipping. So all the work that I did was completely useless because once you flatten everything together, you see those gaps of sharpness. So there was just so many things that went, oh, the hard drive, the hard drive filled up. You didn't realize that another 6,000 images that you needed to do for this insect, you only had 4,000 images left on your drive. So once it gets to 4,000, the other images don't even get registered. So only half of your insect is in focus and everything else doesn't even exist. That's completely useless. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. The back overheated because again, a phase is not used to doing 8,000 images continuously or 6,000 images continuously. So it overheated and it got capture error. It has to slow down. So yeah, that was a nightmare in itself. What makes it really tricky is, again, because of this incredible shallow depth of field, a lot of times you don't know that something has gone wrong until you get that final flat file that we talked about. What's the process to get that flat file? Okay, I've shot everything. I think it's great. I think everything's going perfectly, no issues whatsoever. The software needed to get to the point to get a flat file had to be custom built to handle this many images. And I used the software and I actually worked with the engineer that custom built the software himself. He actually built it. Called Zareen. Helicon is great for short stacks, not for these gigantic deep stacks. So if you're shooting a watch and you're focus stacking a watch or a car that needs 50 or 100 images, Helicon is fine. You can handle that, no problem. It really struggles when you're doing 6,000. So I had to get custom software to be built to be able to handle that. What does that really mean? My face file, native file, is an IIQ format. The custom software cannot handle anything but a TIFF or a JPEG or PNG file. You have to convert all the IIQ files to TIFF. So you have to take all those images and convert them. That takes around, depending on how many you've shot, that takes around 14 hours. It can take 10, but usually it's around 12 or 14 hours. Then I have all these TIFF files. Let's say I have 6,000 TIFF files. Then I have to flatten it. And that's when I use Zareen. And Zareen has a 25 step process. It's not just click a button and just go away again. It's you click this button and then an hour later, that first step is done. And then you have to click another button to start another process. So you can't just sort of leave it and just walk away. That entire process can take up to 10 hours. Only when I've done those processes do I get to that perfect flat file. And sometimes, and actually a lot of times, only then do you realize that something has gone wrong. Holy crap, I didn't calculate the back, my back point to be the correct one. In fact, there was something even further back that I assumed wasn't there. Or I assumed it was further forward because again, I'm looking at such small things. Which renders the whole project that you just shot utterly useless. You cannot use it. You can't replicate that in post. So you have to scratch it. So after all that time of shooting continuously 4 to 5 hours, 6 hours, 14 hours of conversion, 10 hours of flattening the file, only then sometimes do you actually see if your file is good enough flat to be able to send off to retouching. And only then you send it to retouching if it is. The average that it took for me to, for my retoucher to work on these images was 46 hours of retouching per insect. The longest was 86 hours. And I'm going to show you some of these examples. And the reason why I'm pulling this up is I'm actually using working off TIFF files right here. So you're going to see the full resolution of these files. So this is one of the insects that was actually really successful. It worked. I think this actually shot one of the best ones. This is around 12 millimeters or 10 millimeters, if I'm not mistaken, in its actual size. But this is the full TIFF file. And what it does is, this is what 151 megapixels looks like, where you can see the tiny, minute hairs on the side of a wing of this tiny, tiny insect. And these hairs and the pores of the, I guess these are hairs on the back of it. Again, I'm not an expert in these at all, but it's just, this was the kind of resolution that I was envisioning the whole time. And it's very tough to do this with a sensor and some of the equipment that can't quite handle this number of files and the depth of field to be shot in such an extreme way. I have a few more examples as well. So this is a tarantula wasp. And again, when you're zooming in, it's just really finding, and these are TIFF files, so it will take a few seconds to really to lock on in terms of sharpness. As you can see, it's still building it. But the resolution and the quality of the files, especially when printed large, is really quite spectacular. The individual hairs on each of the wings as well, and the spikes on its legs. One example that I wanted to show you, this was the one that took the longest to do in post-production. This took 86 hours. The reason why it took 86 hours is because this is the final file. So you can see how every hair is wonderfully clean. It's super sharp. There's not a lot of debris anywhere near it, right? Nice and clean. This is what my flat TIFF file looked like. This was after I cleaned it. There were a lot of these that I couldn't see with the naked eye. And this is not actually this isn't the complete full file. This is just one of the sharp points that I decided to choose, because as you can see here, this is completely out of focus. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to show you just how dirty the specimen is, even after I thought that I did a decent job of cleaning it. And that's why it took so long, because you have to go pixel by pixel, basically, to remove this and make it look like none of this debris is there. So let's talk about this depth of field issue. I've selected some of these images. These are my actual TIFF files that I chose as part of the entire stack. This isn't all of them. I'm just using this for to show different points of where the focus was along the image. So this was the first image that one of the first images that I took. As you can see, if you can think how tiny this amount of space is right here. This is less than millimeters. This is tiny amount of focus. Everything else is completely out of focus. So I'm just focusing on what's my near point. This, to me, this little part of the wing was the closest thing to my lens that I saw when I was trying to look at it parallel and figure out where is my start point. And look at the depth of field, where only this little slither is in focus and everything else is out. And then as the images start coming in and my focus is shifting, you can see how now this is out of focus, but only this slither is now in focus. And as you keep going down, that focus is going to keep moving. And look at the debris as well. That has to get, every one of these has to be removed. And I'm pretty fanatical about that with my retoucher. He was not happy with me. And then it just keeps going. So now this is completely out of focus, but look, this plane here on the wing is the exact same plane that is on this back wing. They must be on the exact same focus point. So that's why those two are in focus, where this is now coming towards the camera and is out of focus. And as you keep going, that depth of field or that focus point is moving from front all the way through to the back. I mean, where is it here? Here we go. So it's still in the wing. It's getting into the legs. And let's go a little bit further. Here we go. This wing is completely gone. I can't make out any detail on this. This was the first wing. So now it's getting into these tiny microscopic hairs. And as you keep going, it's now moved on to the body. And look at that iridescence. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I chose this orchid cuckoo bee, just because it's so incredibly beautiful. And this is no post. This is raw, out of camera and lights. And as you continue doing it, my far point, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was either the tip of this front antenna or the back of this wing. Let's see how far I went. Yeah, so we have this antenna that's kicking in. So this is why it's such a strenuous process. And there's the end. This must have been the far end one. So that's one of my last points. And look where I started. This is where I started. Absolutely nothing here. And that's where I end up. And that's what I was saying is so difficult to, when you're trying to find your near and far, this is what you're looking at. So you have to go, if I'm trying to hunt for something that I think is further in front than this, it is so difficult to do even when I'm moving the rail, because very quickly, everything gets out of focus. And I just lose perspective of, was that bit there in front of the other one? So it just comes with practice in terms of, I've got a few more examples of exactly this. It comes with practice for you to figure out where my near and where my far is. And actually, I like to buffer a little bit. So I give a little bit of allowance. Okay, I might miss something. So I'm gonna take a few hundred extra images that are gonna be completely useless, but at least I'm gonna make sure that I capture it. So this was a top-down one as opposed to a side profile. So starting here, I guess this is the far, so this is the pin. I don't care about the pin because that's gonna get taken out anyway. So I'm focusing on the thorax over here. And as you're going down, I don't have as many of this one, but as you're going down, the thorax is now completely out of focus. And it's just that plane of focus, a very thin slice depth of field plane of focus that is coming into its own. Until the entire insect is completely finished, and you hope that when you pull up after all that time, your 6 hours of shooting, 14 hours conversion, 10 hours of flattening, and you get your final file, you hope that this leg hasn't moved and it hasn't gone here, or its antenna has fallen off, or something's happened to the insect that you can't bring back in post, because otherwise it's completely useless. It's completely, you have to start all over again from scratch. Another final example. So this is a weasel. This is a hairy weevil from Madagascar, a very rare specimen. This was really tough because, again, the hairs are coming off it in all different directions. So I had to try as best as I could to figure out where's my near point. I found this to be the closest, if I remember correctly. And then as you're shooting, it's moving away. That's the middle one over there. So that's now completely out of focus. And it's moving throughout the entire length of the insect until that's now out of focus. But look where my far is. My far point is going to be somewhere in his back leg over here. It hasn't even made it there yet. There it is. One of these ones. Just that tiny microscopic hair that is the final point of focus. So it just takes practice to try and get it right, but that's the reason why it took hundreds and hundreds of attempts to try and do this. I've shot close to 100 insects, only 24 that I've actually put on my website. A lot of them could not be used, but for a multitude of reasons. Trying to think, one important topic that's going to affect how many images you take is exactly how you choose to position your insect. So for example, I showed you two examples. One of them where the orchid cuckoo bee was on its side, and then the other ones that were more flat. A lot of them that I did were actually flat, just because I wanted to show the insect in its entirety. I wanted to show the full wings or something that was unique about them. If you lie it on its side, there's a higher chance that you're going to need more images because of the insect itself being just deeper in terms of where your near and far point is. If an insect is very flat, one of the insects that I did was like a very flat discus one. It only needed 300-400 images because the depth of it wasn't as big as one that, for example, had this crazy antenna that was flowing around and coming and meeting at the end. So the number of images that you take will be very heavily dependent on how you position your insect and how thick your insect is, how big it is, how deep is your insect. That is a massive decider for it. Trying to think, the other thing that's really crucial that we haven't discussed is the fact that this project is it's a very controlled environment. So I shot this in a studio with strobe lights on a tripod. So my camera wasn't moving unless, again, external factors like the AC and the earthquake that was affecting it. But as far as I was concerned, my tripod was steady, rock steady. That takes away my ISO because my ISO can be as low as I want it to be. And my shutter speed is really dependent on what my flash is going to be doing. So I think I was probably a 1/250th because the shutter speed of the camera doesn't matter. It's dependent on what my flash duration is. So I think I was at 1/250th. And when it came to the aperture, one more thing, I apologize. One thing that I got to mention as part of the entire process is that for you to calculate correctly what your lens should be doing, you need to figure out what your magnification is. So there's 3 mathematical calculations that you have to do to figure out what's my magnification, what is the distance from the insect to the front of my lens, and what is the distance from the back of my lens to the front of my sensor. And Output provides this chart, and it's all dependent on the size of your specimen that you're shooting. My sensor remains static, and it's always the same size. My specimen changes depending on how big the actual insect is. So when you do that magnification calculation, like I showed you with a child is 1 meter and my sensor is 1 centimeter, then that's 1/100th. Obviously you flip this because it's macro. So it will vary. It's not always a 4:1. Sometimes it's a 2.3:1, depending on that calculation. And once you have that magnification, the chart itself shows you, if you have this magnification, this is your distance from your subject to your lens and from your lens to your sensor. So that's another step that I apologize. I totally forgot to mention that as part of my initial, before I even start shooting anything. So it's definitely a strenuous process. It's not a point and shoot. But like I was talking, I'm on a tripod, I'm steady. What are you doing if you're out in the field? You know, if you're trying to shoot something that is actually alive, that changes everything. If you're outdoors, you're now dependent on, if you're not using flash, that is, you're depending on the weather. You're depending on what the sun is doing. How bright is it? Is the subject moving? Am I on a tripod or am I handheld? If I'm handheld, and you need to be at least 1/60th, depending on how good your camera is in terms of shakeability for it, in terms digital stabilization for it. It will be very difficult for you to get sharpness all the way through with just taking one photo, even if you're getting close to, let's say, a bumblebee that's on a flower. You're going to have that out of focus, that bokeh. When that quality of that out of focus is called your bokeh. You're going to have that out of focus because you don't have the ability to focus stack because the insect is moving. So that's the advantage of shooting dead specimens, is that they're not technically, unless their head falls off, they're not moving, they're standing still. So I can choose my near and my far, and I can control how long that's going to take. If I choose 1 micron, it's going to take me hours. If I choose 100 microns, it might take me 2 hours, less than tons of hours. So depending on what you're shooting and the environment that you're shooting in is going to massively affect your settings and how you do it. Your ISO has to obviously go up if you're outdoors. You can't shoot at an ISO 50 because your shutter speed needs to be higher. So we can talk more about that if anyone has any more questions about that, because it's a little bit different than what I shot for this particular project. But if you have any questions about outdoors, let me know. The final thing I want to touch upon before I start taking some questions is, how does this affect my storage capabilities? This is not your everyday, usual, typical project. Again, I shoot commercially, I shoot products and cars and whatever else. I don't need to shoot 8,000 images, especially as part of one individual stack. And then 4 hours later, I'm again shooting 8,000 images. Shooting that large amount of images especially when a face file, a native face file, is 192 megabytes, if I'm not mistaken. And then as soon as you convert it without even making any adjustments in post, all you do is you convert from an IQ to a TIFF, automatically that jumps to over 900 megabytes per file. So take 900 megabytes times 5,000, 6,000, depending on how many. Remember, I shot 100 of these bugs, and there was a lot of experimentation that I ended up keeping because I wanted to see what went wrong. You need tremendous amount of capacity, fast, dependable, large capacity storage that can handle shooting 900 megs or 500 megs per image every 3 seconds. Not a lot of hard drives can do that, and I know Pete can go into this a lot more. But throughout this entire project, like the entire year and 10 months that I did this, I never had a drive fail. I never had a drive stop my project because it couldn't keep up with the data transfer that I was doing. It was my fault when it failed. It didn't even fail. It was my fault that I didn't realize I was running out of storage. That's an issue on my end. That's nothing to do with SanDisk. But having those huge drives that can handle that data transfer was absolutely crucial. There was no way you'd be able to do this because you can't stop. Once the process starts, you can't stop it and then start it again. It doesn't. So you can, like, let's say, change a hard drive. It doesn't work that way. Once it starts, it has to go all the way through, or you start all over again. So I am 100% confident that there's no way this project would have been able to be done if it wasn't for the help that I got from SanDisk, just from their expertise. Hey guys, I'm doing this. What do you recommend would be the best way of, what hard drives would be the best one to be able to do this? So their knowledge and their help throughout this project was absolutely crucial. And the final thing that I just wanted to share is what does the final project really look like? If someone is bored one day and wants to go on my website, I'd love for them to have a look at it, because for me, once I finished this and I knew I got an amazing image, I always knew that it had to be either printed big or it had to be seen big. There's no point of me showing that this was a 10 millimeter specimen and it just looks like a sort of an average specimen size on a computer. It needed to be something that would blow people away. And that's why we custom built a software directly into my website that allows whoever wants to go on it really the ability to zoom in at close to 400% on something that's already tiny, to really zoom around and just on your own figure out parts that are really interesting. I've chosen some spaces that I think you should have a look at that are kind of unique. So you can definitely play around with that. But we have 24 in total. So if anyone's bored, like I said, I would highly advise for someone to go and check it out. Let's see how these are full TIFF files. You're not looking at JPEGs here, and that's why it takes a little while for them to fully load. And that was consciously done. You can't do this on a JPEG. It just gets crunched way too much by the internet and putting it online. So you can't get this kind of resolution. It's still trying to load here. There we go. That's still trying to load. It's still trying to load there. So give it a little bit of a second, but I really wanted to see this in its entirety. And printing it big is really something to be. You need to sort of see this. I have one that's printed in a 48 by 72 that you can just walk right up to it and look at this incredible detail. So in a nutshell, that's Exoskeleton, and that's why it was so incredibly frustrating and time consuming for me to do, and expensive to try and really do this. And I'm glad that I did. I've learned more about photography from this project than anything that I've ever done before. It's by far the most challenging, by far the most my longest duration project, and learned a lot. Again, I was reaching out to experts and saying, hey, I'm trying to do this and I'm struggling with even finding the right aperture. I remember there was a discussion, someone that shall remain nameless, but very high up at a very large camera company. I explained to them what I was trying to do, and I said to them, look, I think I need to be as open as I can on my lens. So the Rodenstock 105, I believe, can go to an f/22. Please don't quote me on that. I think it's f/22, but at its widest, it's a 5.6. So I said to them, I think I need to be as open as I can, because if again, for reasons I talked about, if you go into an f/12, or f/11, or 16 or 22, you're getting into diffraction. And you don't want that, because you can't take that out in post. So my understanding was I want to be as open as I can. So I had it at a 5.6. They explained to me, no, you don't want to do that. You want to shoot your entire project one time at 5.6, and then you redo it again in the middle. So between your 5.6 and f22, whatever that is, f11 or f16, whatever it is, and then you flatten that, and then you finally shoot one that's fully closed, like your f22, whatever it is, and then you combine all of those together. I did that a few times, and it doesn't work. And think about it: 3 separate shoots of the same insect flattened together, and then those 3 had to be merged together in post. We just got so much diffraction from shooting at an f22 that it wasn't worth it. And Alpa did confirm that. So for me, it was great to sort of see Alpa saying, no, you need to be as open as you can when it comes to your lens. So I shot this whole thing at a 5.6. That's kind of my spiel. So we're coming up to the hour, and if anyone has any questions, or Pete, if you have some questions that I haven't already answered that someone has, I would love to take this opportunity to answer them.
Yeah, you answered most of them as they came up or whatnot throughout the conversation, but James Madison Thomas does want to know, how does one do focus stacking without the elaborate setup that you have?
Right. So that's a good question. Some fancy cameras, like the Phase 1, has it built in. So very similar to the Alpa Rail, the Phase 1 system, you can choose, this is my near point, this is my far point, and these are the number of times that I want you to shoot in that, or it auto calculates for you, given your near and far, I think it needs to have 30 images, or I think it needs to have 100. Not everyone can afford that. The only other way to do it when it's not built in is for you to literally go manual, which is a reason why these sort of systems are superior, because it's always consistent. The step is always the same distance. Whereas if you try and do it, so I'm going to go from here to here, and I'm going to take a shot, and I'm going to move it a little bit, and I'm going to take a shot, I'm going to move it a little bit. You will find variances in your steps, and those variances will come through when you see that final file put together. So it's ideal to have something that is very consistent. Otherwise, unfortunately, you just have to do it manually by hand. I'm sure that's not what you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
and it's made even worse if you're trying to do as many images as I was doing. You can't sit there for 8,000 images. And
is there a rail that you would recommend that they use?
The NovaFlex rail, the one that the Alpa has, is the only one that I know that does that very, very well. I'm sure if you do some research, there might be some others, but they're not many. It's a very specific type of photography. This sort of machinery is not applicable for product photography, if you really think about it, because you can do that. I can do that with my Phase without needing the rail, because I already have it built in. This is only really done when you're doing extreme macro photography, whether it's you're trying to almost try and look at the chlorophyll in a plant, almost to those levels of magnification, that you need something like this. Because of the depth of field being so shallow, you need to have a rail that is consistent all the way through. Otherwise, when you're doing a car, you need 20 images. Yeah, you can get away with doing it incrementally yourself. But when it's 6,000, it's not really feasible.
Yeah. That was the majority of the questions. So if anybody out there listening, if you've got additional questions, or if we didn't answer them to your satisfaction, please put them in the chat as well. And
I totally forgot to mention something that's actually incredibly important, and I'm surprised no one's brought it up yet. What was my data management like?
Oh, okay. I was gonna say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll lead you into it, because I know you love talking about it, obviously, because this is your specialty. You have 8,000 images or 6,000 images, and we flatten it and we have it into a TIFF file. What do you now do with it? Because I'm sure as hell not doing a retouching on that. It's a nightmare. You saw how many debris little things I have to clean out. I do not have the patience for it. My process is the following. I like to back things up in at least 2 to 3 places, most likely 3. So the beauty with the SSDs, especially the one that you have, if you can show it up again, Pete, if you show it loud and proud. That
Yep, this
is
little
a
guy.
USB. That little guy is a lifesaver because that is a USB-C connector. Again, I know I'm being very specific talking about the phase, but a lot of other cameras are now doing it where you can shoot directly to that hard drive.
Yep.
So for me, I was tethered to my computer. I had the hard drive shooting directly, the camera was shooting directly to the hard drive, but it was also shooting to a separate hard drive that I was tethered to on the computer. Once those were done and I knew I had them in good, healthy spots, I then did backups of those on separate ones. So I did on a larger capacity ones. I had some 4 terabyte ones because I had so many images. And the final file, again, those 6,000 images coming into one, it's not a few hundred megabytes, it's a few gigabytes. So I'm not just going to hand one hard drive to the retoucher a day because I don't have the capacity for it. I need to put as many as I can to then send off to the retoucher. So the Mobile Pro SSDs were crucial as a transfer vehicle. As soon as I was done with 4 or 5 of them or 6, I would just put it on a drive and send it out to the retoucher for them to do. And then I would focus on the rest. And I knew that all of that stuff was backed up. So that's both the TIFFs. So one more final thing. I would save not only the final TIFF file, I would save the entirety of the project. Because who knows, for whatever reason, I lose my TIFF file, my main one, or whatever reason, or I want to see what happened throughout the entire project itself, individual 6,000 images. I have it, the name of the bug in a folder, all the 5,000 or 6,000 images, and then I have the final TIFF file next to it. So it's not like once I'm done with it and I have my flat TIFF, I delete all my 6,000. I still keep both, which is again why I needed terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of drives.
So for your terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of drives, what do you use in terms of either single bays and backing them up, or RAIDs and 2 bays versus 4 bays, etc., and why?
Yeah, I had so again, the project took so long, a year and 10 months. I did have to switch around the drives when they filled up. So I think I had a 6 bay and I had a 4 bay. I started out with a 32 terabyte one, and then I ended up with a 56. And then I ended up, the last one was in the 70s. I think, was it 72? Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, another reason for that is because I do a RAID 5.
Okay.
Which I know I'd like to do a RAID 10, but if I do a RAID 10, it cuts down so much of my capacity
of it.
That for this project, I need that space, but still have the security that if one of the drives goes down, I'm gonna be able to restore it.
Yeah. What about offsite backup? What do you do for offsite?
I have 2 separate drives. One's at my mother-in-law's, and I have an actual drive that I back up every, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how much work I do that's new. I just bring it in, I back it up, and I store it offsite in a safe location.
Okay.
And I'd like to get into I mean, if I could, I think mobile clouding or clouding backups is really going to be the way to go. I foresee that for the future being a massive way of doing it, because if I could just click a button and it goes up to the cloud, that I can access those files anywhere, it just makes everything so much safer.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's the majority of the questions that we've got. And unless anybody else has anything left to ask, please put it in the chat now. And otherwise, Andrei, thank you for your time. And this has been a great hour and we appreciate it.
Yeah. And one final thing, I can't stress this enough. Keep shooting and keep making those mistakes and keep testing something, because you're going to learn something from it. Like I said, I've learned more from this project that I've applied to so many other projects that have nothing to do with macro. It's to do with composition. It's to do with understanding lighting better. It's to do with just understanding technology. And something I've applied for a car shoot recently was something I learned in the middle of one of these insect shoots. So it's not a waste of time. Keep making mistakes. No one has to see your mistakes, right? I've got whatever you see on my website. Trust me, I have 3 times as many projects that will never ever see the light of day because they weren't good enough or it just didn't come out the way that I want. But you're always learning something from it. So don't be discouraged. Keep shooting. If you have questions that you haven't thought of until after this meeting or this webinar, please reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to jump on a Zoom call or answer your email. So I'm accessible.
Andre, how can they reach out to you? What's your Instagram?
My Instagram is Andrei Duman Photography, or just find me through my website, andreiduman.com.
Okay. All
So
right.
hopefully someone has learned something.
Yeah.
I wish I heard this webinar when I was doing this project. It would have saved me a lot of months.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you. Thanks to everybody for attending. We appreciate it. And keep your eyes peeled on 42 Live for future events with us.
Sounds great. Thank you, SanDisk Professional, and thank you, Adorama, for the opportunity.
Yep. Thank you, Adorama.